Welcome. I'm Denise Garlick, the state representative for Needham, and I am joined by Rick Merson, who is the Director of Public Works, Ed Olson, the Superintendent of Parks and Forestry, Mark McDonough, a concerned and active resident of the town of Needham, and Matt Borelli, who is the Vice Chair of our Board of Selectmen. We are here this morning to talk to you about the Eversource Vegetation Management Plan and our concerns about our public lands and our private properties and the things that you may do if you are a private property owner, if you belong to an organization that is connected to the public lands, or if you are a resident concerned about how we will deal with this issue and the scope of the problem on all of our public lands. I would share with you that the purpose of the NSTAR Eversource Vegetation Management Plan is that the utility has a responsibility to maintain the transmission lines that run through our town. We have no issue with the what that NSTAR Eversource has to do. We all want to preserve the integrity of that line. We all want our electricity to run well. Our issues and our concerns deal with how the NSTAR Eversource plans to do that. The goal is not, number one, I want you to know, is not determined by the federal regulations as something that you may have heard. The lines in Needham are 115-volt lines and not the higher voltage that determines what NSTAR Eversource would have to do. So, in fact, they need to maintain that line, but there is great discussion in how they can do it. And we are working hard to influence Eversource and NSTAR to do it in the most moderate and prudent manner for our town and for the residents of our town. Our main goal is that NSTAR Eversource communicate with us with proper communication, proper notification, that there is proper documentation for anything they want to do on any of the properties, whether they are publicly or privately owned. And we are part of a team of the local, state, in fact, the federal representatives that are advocating for this method to be done in a way that is consistent with the needs of our town. Needham is historically different than many other areas in which you might see transmission lines because of the way the transmission lines came into the town. First, we had the train line that came from the city of Boston. We then built the town around the train line, and our neighborhoods are clustered around many of those along that train line. And then the transmission lines came through. So, in fact, we see transmission lines that are not in the rolling hills of the Berkshires, but we see transmission lines that go through the heart of our town, and we are trying to act accordingly. It would be helpful, I think, Rick, if you could help us to understand, number one, what is the scope of this project. We're hearing a lot of talk about NSTAR has a right to an easement. What is an easement, Rick?
Well, I think the best way to describe the easement is to, and so we're talking in common terms that is recognized by all parties, would be to actually read the definition that Eversource uses for an easement, and we agree that it's a very recognizable and understandable description. I would say an easement is an interest in land owned by another which entitles the holder with a specific use of the property. An easement is typically a permanent encumbrance and transfers to subsequent owners. That being that you own your own property, but the easement provides the rights to for the individual or the corporation that holds that easement to pass and repass over that property and to do what is ever specifically written in the easement document itself. And the town of Needham has easements for sewer, drain, and water purposes across private properties where needed in order to get the services provided to the entire community. So it's not an unusual circumstance, and I believe this is one of those situations where the Eversource, going back over 100 years ago, needed to bring power out into the territories beyond the city of Boston, and this was a mechanism that they could use.
And I think when we have a chance to speak to Mark McDonough, one of the things we're going to find out is because the lines came out over 100 years ago, that there have been changes in the easements, there have been land court decisions, and that's one of the reasons we need to be particularly aware in Needham about the documentation that Eversource will show to the private property owners as well as to the lands that I know that you are guarding.
Yes.
To the best you can. So we hear talks about the easement, and we hear talks about a right-of-way. What's a right-of-way, Rick?
Well, you can describe it in many ways. The streets that we live on that are owned by the town, so to speak, are considered rights of way, but those are lands that the town actually owns from the back of one sidewalk to the back of another. There are rights of way that the railroad owns. They actually own the property for which the rail line runs on. And when we talk about railroad, we always refer to rights of way. They actually own the property. Then there are other types of rights of way, such as an easement. In this case here, the easement that overlaps part of the railroad right-of-way and the railroad property is an easement format that grants the ability to let the electric company pass and repass and do whatever maintenance requirements are within that right-of-way. So when we refer to rights-of-way for this discussion here, I think you need to indicate that the right-of-way would be the area of the easement that's being described and discussed that the electric company believes that they have the authority to work and maneuver within.
And these terms are legal terms. They are not the kind of terms that maybe the private property owner can discern just from the documents they're getting from NSTAR Eversource, but in fact would want a lawyer to look carefully at what's in the right-of-way, what's the easement, what's their deed, what's their plot plan.
Yes, the rights of way, when you own your property, when you buy your house, if you have an easement on there, it probably refers to the easement, but it doesn't describe it in great detail, but it has a reference to another document that's filed in the Registry of Deeds or in Land Court that you can go to and actually research and identify what those rights and authorities are. Sometimes they actually put that in the deed and incorporate that into the deed. Other times it just references the document that you need to go to then look at and investigate where and what the authorities are that they may have across your property.
Thank you. And we're showing now a map of the scope of the project, and in the literature that we're looking at, it's divided into the right-of-way, segment 1, segment 2, segment 3. But Rick, can you just tell us where this starts and where this finishes that's a concern to Needham?
Well, the entire right-of-way in the 3 segments as described in the document actually goes from Boston through Dedham, through Needham, Dover, Sherburne, Natick, Framingham, all the way out to Southborough. The area that we're concerned, obviously, is within Needham. It starts coming in from Boston, where the rail line comes in across Cutler Park Reservation, across 128, and it follows all the way through to Needham Junction, and then takes the spur that goes out toward Dover, out through Red Wing Bay, and then off into Dover. So the area that we're most concerned with here, obviously, is where the easement overlies or overlaps portion of the railroad's right-of-way. And we know that that is a common practice that utilities would do. They already have a pathway, so to speak, that was already conveniently provided for. They made it easy for them to build the pole lines that were needed, and easy for them to maintain it. So, as you referred to, going over through the countryside, this case here, they already had a pathway available to them that made it easy for them to install and construct the line, and is also the mechanism that they're going to use to try to actually do the maintenance that they need to do on it.
So I'm sure as people are looking at the map and they begin to understand how long this line is, they see that not only is it our public lands, but it's our neighborhoods that this line is going through.
Yes. Yes.
I would be remiss, Rick, to be in your presence on a public communication channel and not thank you for your tremendous service in public works in winter, summer, spring and fall, roads and snow and everything in between, Rick. And to take on this issue in advocacy for the town and for the private property owners, I just want to express my respect for you.
Thank you. I know I appreciate that, and I'll let the department be aware of that.
Incredible work on your part and your staff's part. So as we move on to our Superintendent of Parks and Forestry, who has taken on a tremendous amount of responsibility in the town's approach to this issue of vegetation management, I was wondering, Ed, if you could describe to us what the public lands are that are involved.
Sure. Good morning, and thank you to the Needham channel for having us today, and thank you, State Rep. Denise Garlick, for moderating this discussion today. To answer the question, there are quite a bit of public lands that fall within the easement. Walking from the golf course, obviously there's a lease with the town for Needham Golf Club. And then we have the lands along DeFazio. We have a small snippet of public land from Dedham Ave to about Webster Street. And then obviously our new rail trail that's about to begin construction in the next couple of weeks will abut the transmission lines for quite a bit of land from High Rock Street approximately to Red Wing Bay that Rick mentioned earlier, the trustees of reservation land.
So Ed, through your position and through your own personal commitment to the town, I know that you have taken on tremendous responsibility around proper communication. And as representatives of the town, we have been enforcing that, reinforcing that through formal meetings and in written communications with Eversource. But could you share with us what that communication is and what your expectations are?
My expectation will be similar to how we approached the distribution line clearing that we incurred a couple of years ago with Eversource. In that process, we established a set of practices that work very well, and that would be a daily communication, an email referencing where they would be in particular neighborhoods, on what circuit, and I would then give that to the town manager and others, and we'd post that on the website so concerned citizens could follow the distribution line clearing and be involved in the process. Many people had expressed interest and know when their neighborhoods would be impacted, so that worked out well. In addition to that, we'd meet once a week, typically Fridays, with the tree contractor and our ACRT rep that was managing the project on a day-to-day basis, as well as an Eversource rep, and we'd actually lay out a circuit map and we'd mark up the map and marker and talk about the week's events. We talk about the neighborhoods, any issues that came up, any struggles, and it seemed to work well. So with that being said, I envision this transmission line clearing would be a similar process, a daily email describing the locations or referencing the area that they'd be working at. Obviously, this is a much slower moving process because of the scope of this job. And then similarly, once a week, meet with the Eversource rep, the contractor that's performing the work, and talk about the week and actually mark up the right-of-way as to where they've been and where they're heading the next week.
I'm aware, Ed, that you are expecting that and work would be stopped if this does not happen. There has to be an Eversource representative in the town at any time that work is taking place. Not a representative from the tree cutting company, not a representative from the people that are putting out the markers, but an Eversource person that you will have a cell phone for, that you can contact, and you can stop that work if you have a question or feel that you might want to tell us a little bit about the marking of the trees, but if in any way we feel that trees are being taken down that were not marked, that you can intervene at that time.
Eversource has made their commitment that they'll have someone, a project manager, on this job throughout the entire time. So we will have a point of contact every day if an issue arises, or again, if, as you mentioned, for a check-in, just to make sure the work is going according to schedule. We have asked Eversource to mark all the trees that they're removing so that we can be clear as accurately as possible that the trees are falling within their right-of-way. In addition to that, we ask that the people who live along these neighborhoods that are impacted by this, the abutters, do the same. Again, Eversource is committed to working with the neighbors, the abutters, all the abutters. If you have a concern, we'd advocate that all people get involved. Make that conversation, make that call, have that conversation, have someone from Eversource come out to your property, talk about the trees that they're targeting in your backyard, and have that discussion. And as you know, Denise, I've made myself available for anybody that would like to have me part of that conversation.
It is extraordinary that you have made this commitment and our town manager has allowed that tremendous allocation of resources to have you and your staff and the people who are concerned about this. When we talk about the public lands, that itself is a full plate for you to be overseeing. But can you explain to us, if a personal property owner contacts the town through the OTM email site, you will be aware that when they are scheduling a meeting with NSTAR, you are willing to be there. One of the things that you might be there for is the appropriate marking of the trees, but also for the discussion around mitigation that the personal property owner has a right to, and certainly you'll be doing for the town on public properties. Can you tell us what, how you see those meetings go and exactly what mitigation is?
Yes, good question. Mitigation, how I see that going, again, I envision this as a process, and the process would be started by a call to Eversource, engaging with Eversource early now, try to figure out the scope and how that impacts the abutters, much like we'll do on our public lands. We have been given the commitment from Eversource numerous times at public meetings that they will offer mitigation on an individualized basis, meaning that they are willing to meet with both the town for public lands as well as individual property owners to discuss the clearing itself and then the aftermath of the clearing. We're not positive what type of mitigation they're offering, but from conversations I've had with colleagues in Framingham and Natick, they have been good to their word. They've done some major collaborations in Framingham on some seeding of slope areas and tree planting and Arbor Day celebrations, as well as in Natick. The one thing I will mention about mitigation, I think it's clear for the homeowners that, and I think Mark brought this up at a public meeting recently, and it was good advice, take pictures. Take a picture of your backyard now as how it stands. Take a picture after the trees are marked. And I say that because I've heard some stories in Natick where there was that conversation, there was that upfront agreement, that contract between the homeowner and Eversource, and then what happened was when the tree company that got the contract, they came through, and obviously they weren't part of that contract, and additional trees were taken down. Again, as Mark has mentioned, you can't get those back. So again, if we have a visual catalog as to how the yard looked, what trees were marked, so if there was a snafu after the fact, there's some documentation. And again, speaking of documentation, when we talk about mitigation, especially on abutters properties, private lands, I'm there to help and to offer advice, but however, it is a private situation. That's an agreement between the abutter and Eversource. If there is an agreement, we ask to try to get that in writing, even if that entails the homeowner having to email Eversource, thank you for coming today. Thank you for marking my trees. I look forward to working out a mitigation strategy, just so you have that email trail, some paperwork, some pictures, and have a little added protection for the what-ifs.
So I think that's really helpful, Ed, and I think that comes under when we talk about proper notification and proper communication. We are aware of a ruling of the Department of Public Utilities of yesterday, which was Tuesday, October 21st, that Eversource has been cited for not providing proper notification to the town of Needham. Eversource now has to reissue all of the notification letters. You have to get a first-class mailing. If you are a private property owner, or the town will receive this as well, of notification that Eversource wants to do this work. They also will put door hangers offering to have these meetings. We are asking anyone who chooses to have these meetings to send an email to the OTM at needhammass.gov that we'll have on the screen at the end, so that you are aware that these meetings are set up. We can ensure that people who are asking for meetings are actually getting meetings, and that they use that meeting to their best advantage during this project. And I just love that idea between you and Mark of the taking pictures. We need to ensure that after all of our meetings and all of our discussions and all of our formal letters, that the right hand knows what the left hand's doing. We can't have Eversource agree to us on some issue and then have a tree cutter who's a subcontractor come in and do something else. Mm-hmm. And maybe as we move to you, Mark, we'll talk about the legal rights that a private property owner has in the event that a tree is taken down that is not marked. Right. So very important to be able to prove both. But Ed, as I said to Rick, I am in awe of the scope of this work that you're taking it on, with the energy that you're taking it on, and the real commitment to the town. You know, this willingness to stand with the private property owner, not to negotiate for them because that's not your role, but to stand there with your expertise and say, this seems appropriate, this doesn't, is above and beyond the call of duty, and we are all really grateful for it. Mm. And any private property owner would be wise to have Ed Olson at their side, and at the end of that discussion, get Eversource to initial their notes, and then Eversource is supposed to also give a written document of what they have agreed to do for that private property owner. Which brings us to my all-time favorite private property owner, who has done tremendous work and is organizing friends and neighbors and is a wealth of information. So Mark, I'm I know you live up in that Elmwood, Fairfield neighborhood.
Yeah.
That neighborhood is particularly vulnerable in this process. Could you tell us what you have done and what you're suggesting to the private property owner to do in this process?
Yes, 3 years ago when this began was went right to the court, got a copy of the deed, got a copy of the easement that was referenced on the deed, and then I had questions because I didn't think it said exactly what the width of the easement was. So I went right out and got a land attorney, a land use attorney, and she looked into it and she thinks there are some legitimate questions, so she reached out to Eversource. In the interim, subsequently, I've got a title examiner to pull not only my deed, but all the neighbors' deeds, Elmwood Road, Dogwood Road, so that we can get a picture of that section, because that section seems to be in question since the original taking document. There's been some requests to the land court to reduce the easement, and it has been reduced at land court. So the easement that Eversource would claim to have is not necessarily the easement they have through that neighborhood. So as a group, the neighbors and I have joined in to have a conversation with Eversource and try and clarify what the width of the easement is through the neighborhood so that they can come in and cut the right width and only the right width. So what I say to people is this: you need to get a copy of your deed and your easement. You need to know the dimensions of that easement so you can document what's in the easement and make sure if you have trees outside the easement, they're protected. If they're cut inadvertently, as a property owner, you are entitled to triple damages of trees that are cut outside that easement. So know your rights. There's money at stake. You know, after you know what your easement rights are, have Eversource out, have them describe to you exactly what they plan to do, have any conversations around potential mitigation that needs to take place, and get that in writing. Then they can come in and do their work.
One of the things that you have done that I so greatly admire is that you have reached out to your neighbors. Not only you trying to do the best job you can for your own personal property values, but you're reaching out to neighbors. And I know that you've been concerned for some neighbors who may be elderly and for whom the notification hasn't been clear.
I have a lot of older neighbors, and one of the concerns I have for them, this is all very overwhelming to them. They just feel like some authorities coming in and telling them they have a right and they're going to exercise their right. Whether or not they think it is the right, they're just concerned and they're intimidated. And I think if someone's able to get in there and help get them the information they need to make an informed decision, that's the right thing to do for your neighbors. So that's what I jumped in and started doing. And now we have a little group. I think there are 6 or 7 homeowners involved up in our neighborhood who are all being represented by the same attorney. And it isn't that they don't want this to happen. We know this utility clearing has to happen. It's just how it happens.
That's right.
And the extent to which the cutting happens. You know, because people are going to live in these homes.
That's right. And I think the work that you've done in reaching out to your neighbors, the strength of the neighborhoods and being able to contain this work so that it is done to protect the lines, but no more than needs to be done is done. That group of neighbors that then gathers is also protecting the town.
Yeah.
And we're grateful to you personally, to your neighbors, and to that group of neighbors that, you know, the whole sense of this transmission line running through the heart of the town, that work is appreciated by all of us.
It's a good group of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Ed, before we leave that, we are also very concerned around the issues of erosion.
Yes.
I know it's something that Ed Olson is dealing with our Conservation Commission on. They're dealing with erosion around the wetlands, but we have now reached out to Keolis, the MBTA commuter rail, and asked them to also make an assessment of those steep embankments that lead down to the railroad line, and to ask for mitigation as well on their property for erosion.
Yeah, because the Elmwood Road section is particularly at risk for erosion, I think.
And the abutters checklist that we're showing is a direct reflection of the work that Mark is engaged in. So your work is teaching us all what the personal private property owners need to do. So thank you.
Thank you.
So Matt, it all sounds like such a big task, and we certainly know that the town is in the very best of hands with the allocation of resources from our town manager, with the expertise of Ed Olson, with the expertise of Rick Merson, and I must add our town engineer, who was instrumental in our understanding of our deeds and our plot plans, who is Tony Delgazo.
Yeah.
But Matt, can you tell us, for the personal property owner, the kinds of things that the town is doing to help people?
Sure, absolutely. And I just want to start off, it's forums like this and forums that we've had prior to this that just show that we're all in this together. Ed touched upon the public lands that we have control over. And of course, here we're talking about the private lands that we don't have control over, but we can help educate the public on what they can do, like we're doing today, and what their rights are. And we can make resources available to them, as we spoke earlier with Ed, being able to go out and witness some of these meetings and come out on call from these private abutters. So number one, I would just say the private abutters, they have to be involved, they have to make that call, because in our meetings, Eversource has been clear that if it's silent, that's pretty much a waiver that they can go ahead and do the work. So the onus is on the private homeowner, and as Mark said, there might be an elderly homeowner or someone who's away, so it's nice to hear about the neighborhood group getting together and helping those people advocate as well. We're making resources available as far as the deeds. The Registrar of Deeds, Bill O'Donnell, has certified deeds and delivered them to Town Hall. They're there for people to go and pick up. They can also go online at norfolkdeeds.org and see not a certified copy, but get an idea of what their deed looks like. But I recommend going to Town Hall, picking up a certified copy of that deed. We also made available plot plans at the DPW, at the PSAB building. I know Morgan from your office is there, staffing that and helping the flow over there. They can go to the PSAB building, the engineering department, and get a copy of their plot plan. And that way they're able to see if there's an easement on their property. And even if there isn't an easement shown, it doesn't mean that one does not exist. So I would recommend, as Mark talked about, getting an attorney, really, because this is a specialty area of law, and once they get the deed and the plot plan, they can get further information.
And one of the things, Matt, that may be helpful to people too, I'm always so proud to represent Needham because we have so many talented, educated, informed people here, that on the Town of Needham website, there's a hot link right to the vegetation issue. And all of the documents that we are referencing are on that hot link. And I have updates on my website as well under the news section. And we are recommending that people take a look at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission frequently asked questions. And then it becomes very clear to all of us that there is considerable discussion that needs to take place around the how. Not the what that Eversource is trying to do, but as Mark said, the how. And I would also like to share that email address that I'm referencing, if people would use that, anytime they contact Eversource, CC that email address so that we know when your contacts are made, when the meetings are made, what the result is, if you have questions and if there's other things. I know, Matt, as the Vice Chair of the Board of Selectmen, you must share in my pride in this town and in our approach to how we're dealing with this issue.
Absolutely. And thanks for your help as well. It's been instrumental in this.
My pleasure. Well, thank you. So I think it's clear that we all have work to do. We want to make sure that everyone is informed, that you're educated on what you need to do, that you are empowered to take the actions you need to take, whether you are our town officials, whether you are the private property owner. And we only have one time to do this work well. We have one shot at doing it right because, as we all know, when a tree is gone, it's gone. So the work we're engaged in now is so timely and so important for the areas that we're discussing and for our town in general. So thank you to everyone who's watching. Thank you again to this incredible panel, and stay in touch. Thank you.